Good evening. You are listening to Rainbow Radio, in my humble opinion, with Niceguy Eddie is coming up next. Hey, I want to thank everybody who tuned in to the previous Sunday show with Julian Marsh. That was actually an encore presentation, but it was very successful. Apparently so much so that the sheer volume of listeners actually crashed the system over at the licensor and broadcaster. So, appreciate everybody who's called in. I'm sure Julian's very, very happy to hear that. Thank you all. Really appreciate everyone listening. I had an awful lot of fun talking with Julian, I got to say, and I'm definitely looking forward to having him back at another time. And coming up, we've got another treat for you. My guest this evening is Terra Snover, creator of the Mock Girl webcomic. Terra, welcome to the program.
Hello.
So, tell us a bit about yourself before we get into the comic.
Anything exactly you want to know, or just the general me stuff zone?
General you. What makes you tick?
Okay. Well, I've been doing actually webcomics from a very, very young age. I started off actually programming my first webcomic in HTML on Notepad when I was like 12 or 13, somewhere in there. And I'm 28 now, so I've been doing this for, a little while.
Yeah, wow.
Those don't exist anymore. Those webcomics, I have ignored them because they're terrible.
But I was going to ask you where we could find them.
They don't exist anymore. They were a little more than glorified stick figures, and the stories were atrocious and everything. But I did them. Then I went to Kansas City Art Institute, which, by the way, is not affiliated with the Art Institute, who are terrible right now.
Okay.
Yeah. It's an actual school for real artists instead of a money-making scheme. But anyway.
There's a lot of those in education these days, unfortunately.
Yes. I have to preface that now just because I'm actively seeking work and everything. And I'm like, Art Institute, but not that Art Institute.
Right.
But anyway, so I went there for 3 years, graduated a year early, started making web comics again because I wasn't completely overloaded with 20 credit hour semesters, and I've been doing it pseudo-professionally ever since.
I want to ask you, I mean, I definitely want to talk about Mock Girl primarily, but there are previous works out there then that we'd be able to find, or?
Again, non-existent. I removed them. Most of the problem with the earlier ones is that the writing was a little offensive. I was going for shock value, and looking back at them now, they just crossed some lines that I really don't appreciate that I did.
Okay, well that's interesting because let's get into Mock Girl and let's keep those crossing of lines in mind, because that's one of and we hit on this when we talked. God, that was about a year ago now, I think, but for the blog. But yeah, there's definitely some, I mean, maybe not quite to that extent. There's definitely some line crossing in Mock Girl. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what Mock Girl is all about?
Well, first off, I want to start on the name. A lot of people give me stuff about the name. I decided to take that name for a trans-themed comic because it was offensive.
Okay.
It's almost like, how people took offensive language and just ran with it and made it part of their community. That's kind of what I wanted to do.
Black people taking back the N-word, for example.
Exactly. I mean, that's
okay.
That's one thing. And it's one of those pseudo, offensive things. And I just kind of wanted to take its power away.
Sure.
And also, it has other lower meanings. I don't want to get into it too much, but, it is a farce comic. It's, mock. So it's not just there just to be a name, shock value name.
Right. But you get a lot of comments on that, though.
I do. So that's why I wanted to bring it up. People are like, oh, I'm not, love your comic, not a fan of the name. And I kind of regret doing it now, but it was at the time, that was my reasoning.
You know what? It gets your attention though. I'm wondering if when I put the poster up for this show, when I put Mock Girl in huge letters, if that doesn't get people's attention,
it just might.
Get me some notes as well. Who is this person? What's this all about? So tell us a bit about the comic then.
Well, the comic itself is following the life of a character named Sam and her adventures in crazy shenanigans, I guess is the best way of putting it. Like, she goes through everything from dealing with reality TV stars, paying rent, shopping trips, to the mob wars and, threats against her life and everything. So it's all over the place.
Right.
And it's definitely a dramedy because there are some really dark moments in the comic itself, but there's also psychotic clowns who live in her house.
and I guess if we want to talk about crossing lines, let's I brought up those of you tuning in. I brought up Spunko a couple weeks ago, a week before last, I believe it was, when I was interviewing Jessica Eudicious in her interview. And Spunko. This is, if I had a list of top 10 most fucked up fictional characters, Spunko definitely makes the list. I'm not sure if he's number one, but he's up there. Where did you come up with Spunko? That is, I mean, and anyone out listening right now, the comic is worth reading for Spunko alone, and he's not even a major part of it.
Well, yeah, he's my oddity character. I always have one character who's just in my comics, just out in left field, just doing it off in his own world, doing his own thing or her thing. And for this time, it was just actually me asking myself, well, what creeped me out as a kid? And I'm like, clowns. And so I put a clown in the comic when I was doing a scary arc. Originally, he was actually supposed to be just a non-character.
Right.
You know, like maybe 2 or 3 comics and he gets arrested or something like that. But then I found I was having so much writing for him, I just left him in.
He's a bit of a scene stealer. I mean, really, it's like whatever's going on, he comes in and just says something totally out of left field. And it's just like, it's usually hilarious too.
Yeah, and it's the ultimate insanity for, because the comic, even though they're zany and things, are mostly quotation marks straight men, the straight, the normal ones, because they're anchored in a bit of reality where he's just gone. But yeah, he's a really fun character to write for. He's actually one of my favorites.
I can kind of picture that kind of, you create him as a one-off gag and it kind of takes a life of its own.
I try not to overrun him though, because that would just be too much.
Right.
But yeah, when he opens his mouth, it is usually pretty gold.
And it's awful, except that the punchline wasn't so much what he said, so much as his response to Sam's question. But the one that sticks out in my mind was when she was unconscious, and I do want to get to the dream world portion of the comic as well, because she spends a lot of time there. But I think he mentioned something to the effect of, since I already gave you a haircut, which was a big deal anyway, I was going to give you a gynecological exam, but you don't have the right parts. And she's like, what is wrong with you? And he answers, a lot.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was a gag after a gag. I was like, oh my, yeah, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. Well, and also the fun thing about him is since he's so out there, I can make him an every person character. Well, he does everything.
Yeah.
Like I think in so far he's been a hairdresser, a gynecologist,
backup drummer for Gwar.
Huh? Yeah. The drummer replacement drummer for Gwar for a while. Like, And the first time you hear something like that, you're like, oh, that's weird. But then you can make it a running gag, and it's fun. I love him.
Now, the other, and you mentioned some of the darker themes, and there's a lot of different ones. The other one though, and I'm wondering, with what goes on in the sort of dream world or spirit world, I am guessing you either really hate or really love spiders.
I actually really love spiders.
Okay. I kind of guessed that.
Absolutely love spiders. For those of you who have not read the comic, each character who goes into this dream state gets kind of a spirit animal, their totem, the classic thing. And the main characters is a spider, which actually is a very in Native American and actually a lot of text is a very motherly figure.
Really?
I did not know that. It's this very feminine, strong, weaving figure in a lot of ancient cultures, and I went with it. And the fact that I love spiders was just bonus.
Yep. And the fact that Sam is not so crazy about spiders also a source of humor within in other words, dark moment. And the other well, I guess there's 2 other main sources of darkness as well as humor that I think of. The running from her life, which is the subplot with the Russian mob. And,
actually, it's the Italian mob that's after her. The Russian mob is for the ones who are on her side.
Yes. She her mother, Sam's mother, fell in with and that's the other thing. I mean, I guess let's go ahead. Well, I don't know how much, but Sam's mother, I guess I say mother kind of in quotation marks because she's a bit more than that. And I don't know how much, if that's considered spoiler territory at this point or not, but
it's
that's pretty messed up.
It's 100 comics ago.
Okay.
Spoiler territory over.
Okay. So mother / sister.
Yes.
That's messed up.
Well, it's dark. Good comedy comes from tragedy.
Yeah.
And my problem with a lot of webcomics that have been happening and pseudo recently, or actually not even recently, is the perfect life character. The main character seems to be this bumbling fool who falls into perfect everything.
Right.
It's like the Peter Griffin effect, in
Right.
Family Guy, like how this guy just falls, or webcomics especially. It's just the Mary Sue. That's the word I was trying to look for.
Okay.
Mary Sue.
Yeah, exactly.
They're just like, they're the main character. The artist decided that's me and I'm perfect, so I'm going to make me perfect and full ass backwards into money and stuff like this. And I didn't want to go there.
Right.
So I gave Sam a very screwed up past.
Yeah.
And so you can see where this cynical, like, not twisted sense of humor, but definitely dark person comes from, because the things she's had to live through.
Right. Right. And it's interesting because with all of this going on, with all the fact that, and I'm not even sure we've mentioned it at this point, the fact that Sam is trans is about as secondary or as superfluous a detail as could possibly be within the story.
Yeah, I mean, the most recent arc I'm writing right now, it is going to become a little bit more of a thing, but for the most part, it is a background element because most transgender people will tell you that it is a background element.
Right.
It's a part of life. It's something aware of, but it's not like any trans person just goes around just screaming it to the world. Like, it's not their only, it's like writing a female character in a movie or something whose only purpose is to be a female character.
Well, and unfortunately we live in a world where that is most female characters in so many movies. Because of course all movies are written by men.
Yeah.
Or too many, I should say. Too many movies are written by men.
That is true.
Yeah. White, heterosexual men, I should add.
Yes.
So.
And so, yeah, and again, it comes up now and then. It's a part of her life. But again, I don't want to focus on it because, again, a lot of other trans-themed comics, that is the point. Yeah.
And it's interesting, too, because it makes it, and I think the on the opposite end of the spectrum might be the last cartoonist that I interviewed, well, actually two ago now, Jessica Dishes, with Manic Pixie Nightmare Girls. It is front and center in every word of every panel, and and the purpose of it is to be as political and as topical as possible. And I think on the opposite end of the spectrum is Mock Girl, where you're telling a story. You're telling, and it's funny and it's dark and there's a narrative to it, but it's as apolitical as you can get having a trans character.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if there's much more I can say about it, but yeah, the character, it's a secondary fact because it's not her existence. She's, nerdy, she's quirky, she's kind of screwed up in the head, and those are more important things to her than her gender.
Exactly. Yeah, there is another character that was kind of a minor character at first, and within the last few, he's kind of taking on more prominence, and I love it just because of the name and because of sort of the personality that has developed, and that's Crossbow Andrew.
Crossbow Andrew, yes. Actually, the fun fact. Yeah. All the Italian mobs are based off me and my friends.
Oh, okay.
That's where I did my Mary Sue thing. Like Miss Snow in the comic, who's the main person who's like in charge of bookkeeping and stuff for the Italian mob, is me.
Okay.
She's terrible. Crossbow Andrew is based off a friend of mine who has actually been in every single comic I've ever made. Andrew. Okay. Has always been a character. And he's just such a fun character to write for. I always sneak him back in.
So wait, now are there parallels anywhere else? I mean, I don't know. Is there some huge one-armed guy that protects you or anything like that?
No, just the Italian mob members are the people in my friends back home in Colorado. Right. But Crossbow Andrew, the reason I put him back in there was not just because he's based off of my friend. I don't want to see him, shallow into whatever. That's just where he existed from. Is a good in for secondary storylines. I have a lot of fun characters that have developed that have kind of flowed out of existence recently because it's not their time, but this is a subtle way so I could do a story, not like a comic or two revolving around Andrew so I can get these characters back in and let it in the, I guess, is zeitgeist the right word for this? Into the reader's mind.
Gotcha.
So when it's important for those characters to return, you won't be like, who the hell are they?
Yeah, let me go back look at 700 issues ago and see if I can find them. So, well, yeah, because there's a lot of storylines going on, because right now there's sort of a marriage storyline, there's the mob storyline. You mentioned the reality TV, and of course there's the crazy. What is it? Is it the friend of the roommate, or just that
they're not friends. They go to high school together, preppy school.
Right.
Right. Her name is Nikki Reed, which apparently is a real person, so that has nothing to do with the actual Nikki Reed, who's a for. I was just like asking, oh, what's a pop star, reality star kind of name, and that's what I came up with. So if she exists as listening out there, I'm sorry, I did not mean to use your real name.
It's arguably the least sympathetic character in the entire book.
Yes.
It's like, yes, I'm going to burn your house down because you had better hair than me, or something to that effect.
And it's fun watching her. This is what would happen if the Kardashians lost all their popularity at once. That's what I asked myself. That's what the character is based off of. I'm like sitting here like, what if this person, a friend was watching a show, I sat down and watched it. And I asked myself, what would happen if all this stardom just went away suddenly?
Right.
And that's what I came up with. It was because, for the most part, these people are so attention seeking. If all the attention went away, they'd be that kid who ran over to your nicest vase in the house and broke it just so you'd yell at them.
Exactly. Wow. Now the other, I guess, just to finish up there, and just going back to the to the sister mother aspect of this. Generally speaking, there's always and I guess if there was sort of an overt trans related issue or topic in there, family is always a touchy subject, and the father in this case absolutely loathsome for many reasons, but also particularly abusive of Sam and controlling of Sam. But I gotta ask you, I'm gonna take you up on one thing. I know it's a farcical comic, maybe that's the answer for this, but exactly how does somebody deliver a child at age 9 and not someone have calling the police?
Well, actually, you'd be surprised how often it happens.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, like...
Well, I suppose if it happened ever, that would surprise me, so I guess you're right, but...
No, it does happen. It is really screwed up when it does happen. And actually, I did a lot of research before I made that happen.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of research.
So you were trying to find basically the lowest age you could come up with that would be still feasible.
Still feasible, but despicable at the same time. Yeah.
Well, as despicable as possible, I would say.
Exactly.
Yeah, wow.
And, people have been giving birth without doctors for a very long time. So even though the mortality rates just skyrocket.
Oh, I hadn't even thought about that. I mean, that wasn't overtly in the comics. So, yeah, this would be presumably a home or non-hospital delivery then.
Exactly.
That's even more fucked up. Jesus, I never even considered that aspect of her background. Damn.
To say her family life is screwed up is really understatement.
Oh yeah, no, I think any one of the comics that wants to be more direct about the kind of life event issues and whatnot are all going to have a lot of family problems, a lot of not very sympathetic family characters. And for anyone who's following Rain right now, for example, there's a sibling in that's just like all of the commenters on the forum are just like, kill her, burn her alive, torture her. And yet I think the father in Mock Girl takes the cake. I mean, it's as bad as it gets.
He's the worst human being I can imagine.
Yeah.
All rolled up into one ball. Side note, my father's pretty cool, so I'm not like venting or anything. I'm not off past experience. People have asked me, is this comic based off past experiences?
Right.
No.
And that's another thing that's somewhat unique about this, because usually, because I ask that question of just about everybody and that writes, comics in general, trans comics in particular, and it usually it's, not directly, but a lot of, or the character's not based on me, but her experiences are, that sort of a thing. And in this case, really, you have very little in common with Sam, as I recall from our previous conversation.
Yeah, our sense of humors are pretty similar. I'm pretty in that like sarcastic pseudo dark place, but that's just because I grew up in a weird family.
But your experience has been totally different from hers.
Yeah, pretty much. But for me, I think what it comes down to is actually I've been a professional actress since a very young age. My mother was a acting coach, right?
Okay.
For a children's acting coach, instead of going like day camp or after school programs or whatever, I just went to work with her.
Oh wow!
So for the group activities and stuff. So I grew up acting, and so one thing that acting does for you is makes it so you can easily put yourself in other characters' places, mindsets,
Sure.
If you're going to a movie role where the character has been molested or whatever, you have to be able to go there.
Right.
And that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I put myself in these situations and then just kind of let it go happen in my head.
And you write from that then? That inspires your writing?
That's all my writing. My writing process is, there is no writing process. Every single ish comic is written there on the spot. If you ask me what is the long-term goal of what's the final issue going to be or whatever, no idea. I don't know what the next comic is going to, like the next panel is going to be until I write it. So since I'm doing all this active role playing and, acting kind of stuff in my head with the characters with each other,
the story
they
grows
play off each other.
So the story just basically grows organically then?
Yes.
So how many of the elements, I mean, again, reality TV, Russian Italian mob, dark green worlds, dream world, Spunk with a clown, eloping to Japan, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, how many of these elements, did this all just come up when you sat down? None of this was in your head and it somehow went there? Or
that's where the characters went. Yeah, that's the situation.
Wow. So you're writing almost as spontaneous as the characters are acting in the strip.
Yeah, real time. It's almost like real time comic game.
That's really cool. I remember you when we talked before, you were saying it wasn't playing out, but I didn't realize it was quite to that extent.
Yeah, no, it jerks. That's why it feels. That's why another complaint I hear is it's a little jerky. And yes, it is. Like I sent 2 of the characters recently to Vegas to get married,
right?
And now they're going to Japan to get married. Yep. And that was because I'm like, her parents are a little more controlling. They would get in there and make it the point to be like, no, this is happening here where we can see it in traditional wedding, blah, blah, blah.
Right. Right. So there's a rationale behind it. It's not random, but it's not also, it is very spontaneous. It does flow naturally. It does sort of come about as these situations come up.
Yeah.
So are you ever concerned about writing yourself into a corner, just getting into a situation and just be like, wow, I've got no idea where to go from here?
I have actually done that.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I'm notorious, unfortunately, for long absences, like months sometimes, where no comics go up. And once or twice it was because I wrote myself into a corner and just could not figure out how to get out of there. And so it's a dangerous way to write. It is a wicked dangerous way to write. It's the only way I know how to do it.
Okay. Out of curiosity, like what comes to mind that was an example of that?
Actually, one of the more recent arcs where they were all at a concert was a big problem. Okay. I was having a lot of problems with that one because I had them all in the same place.
And you had to get them all going in different places.
Well, yeah. One thing that I found with my writing that helps me is putting the characters in different environments. That way, if I get stuck on a character, I can focus in on another one for a bit.
Oh, right. And then come back to it. But if you have nowhere to go and they're all in one spot, it's like, shit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that one was a little bit of trouble. There was a couple more. I don't remember which ones, especially early on when there were only like 2 characters.
Yeah.
That was a problem.
All right. Well, before we and I guess that kind of finishes up a little bit on the comic, but let's go ahead and have the website. Where will people find this?
Oh, mockgirl.com.
Can't be any easier than that.
Super easy to remember. It's that offensive thing that people give me crap for.
So before we move on, are there any other projects you'd like to plug?
I'm actually right now working on a adventure game that is actually LGBT themed. One of the main characters also trans. Mm-hmm. It's called So This Is My Life? ? And it's actually pretty. I think it's pretty cool. But I'm a little biased to that fact.
You don't say. Well, what's the genre?
Adventure.
Well, I mean, but
slice of life.
Okay, so modern day slice of life.
Oh, not modern day. It takes place in 2005.
Okay.
It has a very Flash game feel to it because that's all that was happening right in 2005. It's like, Flash games were the thing.
Right.
So very vectory look and everything like that. But yeah, so far it's only like the conversation I have programmed in is just people bullshitting around. It's a lot like Clerks, the video game.
Okay.
So, talking about the Death Star labor, whatever, Like, I think the most recent conversation that I wrote, there's a whole path you can take in the conversation that ends up being talking about Firefly for a bit. So,
okay. And when this
Very
is
nerdy.
now, where will people find this once this is completed?
Right now it doesn't. It'll probably be on my personal page, and it'll be all over Mock Girl when it's actually released, because people read that. So there'll be definitely links there. I would love to come back and talk about it more if you'll have me later on.
Absolutely. Definitely drop me a line when you're getting closer to completion on that. Now, you mentioned also early on that you've sort of taken down all of the old webcomics. Now, I know you've developed other games in the past. Do you have any other games that are out there that someone might be able to find that you that you wouldn't mind them finding?
Well, the problem with most of the games I've worked on is they've been with small teams, and a lot of them have crashed and burned. So the release of a lot of them have been moderate, like small at best, and non-existent at worst. Like we get 90 or like 80% of the way there, and then it's just gone.
Okay. Well, yeah, definitely keep us in the loop on this one, and let me know when that's getting closer to being a thing.
Oh yeah. When Birdo is listed as one of the top trans characters in gaming, there's a problem. I decided I'd fix that.
Yeah, definitely. So, all right, we mentioned, of course, the comic is like I say, about as apolitical as you can get. Again, considering it's coming from again, transgender main character, etc. But I guess I'm a little bit curious about your own personal politics. I think if I'm not mistaken, in the previous discussion we had, I believe socialism for the win was the way that you put it.
Star Trek Utopia socialism, yes.
Okay, all right. So then here on this planet, then where are you finding yourself in terms of how things are shaken out in terms of the whole the primaries, Clinton, Sanders, Republicans, etc.?
I am actually pretty pumped about Sanders because he is as left as you can get,
and still have a job in this country
and still have a viable candidate. Yeah,
right.
So I'm pretty behind that. But actually, the thing that interests me more is not even the most recent election. It's more about the evolution of technology and politics.
Okay.
Because one thing that I think we're going to see in the next bit, like we're maybe talking 50 years and stuff, is as things like AI and robotics get better and better, we're going to see more people going out of a job. For instance, in the U.S. right now, one of the biggest industries is transportation. I think it's something like 40%.
Yep.
Something ridiculous like that.
And self-driving cars are becoming very feasible very quickly.
As soon as self-driving cars hit the market, they're going to say, well, we can either pay this guy, $50,000, $60,000 a year, or a robot $2,000 in maintenance a month or whatever.
Yeah, something like
they're going to pick the robot.
Exactly. And for anyone out there who's thinking, oh, self-driving cars, that's 50 years in the future. No, they exist. They exist now. They're on the roads. Yeah. And now they're actually not quite up to snuff yet. The technology does need some development, but I always love to point out to people, I want to kind of get your take on this too, is the self-driving car doesn't have to be perfect. It only has to be better than humans. And we really suck at driving cars. It's one of the things we're particularly bad at, actually.
And actually, if even more cars are on the road that are self-driving and communicating with each other, they're going to be almost absolutely perfect because, zipper maneuvers on the highway for merging is going to become a thing. And so traffic is going to just, traffic jams and stuff are going to plummet.
Right. And the computer can text while drive and not actually be distracted.
Exactly. And so, but because of something like that, we're going to see some huge probably see some pretty wicked changes in the market. Like unemployment rates and things like that are going to go up. So our options are either to go in this like horrible, like corporate, almost monarchy.
Yeah.
Or we're going to have to merge into the socialism path.
Right.
The more socialistic kind of thing, yeah.
And it goes beyond. I mean, you mentioned the transportation sector, but it's everything. I mean, McDonald's is looking at automating the services there. Coffee shops. There's no real reason that a human needs to make your coffee.
No good reason at all.
Other than people need a job.
They do a better job, but that's for now.
Right. Well, and they do a better job if you're really particular about it. But the market, I mean, heck, you think about how many cups of awful swill McDonald's sells. And it's obvious. I mean, yes, there's a market for really good coffee, but there's obviously an equally large market for shitty coffee.
Yeah. Well, also, for instance, there's a robot right now that is actually programmed with, I think, like 14 or 1,500 different items in it.
Right.
And it cooks pretty slow, mind you, but it cooks.
Yeah.
And also, I can't get too much into specifics with it because of non-disclosure stuff, but when I was working Microsoft, we were training the software to take our own jobs.
Yeah. I mean, there's the problem solving. I mean, because we can romanticize it all we want, but I mean, I work in engineering myself, and a lot of it is just very iterative. You take a guess and you try some. Let's throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And it's iterative, but computers can do that, millions of times a second. We can't do that.
Yeah, no, they're pretty quick on the draw about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And it's not, I mean, if you think about, if somebody in the late 80s talking about the internet, as late as 1988, 1989, you would have sounded like a loon. And yet within 3 to 5 years, it's a thing. And now, when we talk about this kind of rapidly developing AI, it's an exponential curve. I mean, it really, it's going to take.
I think they call it the singularity. I might be wrong in my terminology, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to come about a lot faster than people will think, and our society will evolve. I think you have it right. The society will evolve a lot slower than the technology.
Yeah, and so that's what I was saying with the whole political issues.
Yeah.
That's why I'm pretty socialistic, is because, I mean, again, I don't want to be like thinking, oh, I'm going to be, communist China or whatever. What I'm talking about here is we might have to take that approach because it'll work. Because one of the main reasons, all right, why do you become a garbage person? Because it pays well.
Sure.
Right? No one wants to do that job.
Right.
If you take that job out of the equation via robotics and mechanics and stuff,
sure,
that opens up a whole floodgate of people who can be like, well, what? All right, I'm not going to be a garbage person because the job doesn't exist. So they're going to be like, oh, well, you know what? I like professional video gaming, or I'm an artist, or I'm a X or Y, adding to the cultural thing. And the only way to support that sustainably is via give and take. I've always said, technology was the only thing holding socialism back.
Well, and it is a very different viewpoint on it, because you're right. I mean, it's we can't have, at least with capitalism or anything. I would say even socialism or communism as it has existed so far, you can't have a painting and poetry based economy. You can't have an economy of musicians and artists and even video game designers. It's you need a lot more than that, and a lot of those jobs are going away.
Exactly.
And how do people consume? How does the rest of it become supported? It's a scary thought for a lot of people.
We're an adaptive people. We can get there. So that's why. Long story short, that's why I'm a technological socialist. I guess the best way to put it.
Interesting. Well, I guess now, if going back to the candidates, so I had kind of guessed that you would have been a Sanders supporter, and I guess I'm always a little bit nervous about supporting the early momentum. They're getting too excited about early momentum. There's Hillary Clinton's not the most universally loved candidate that's ever come along, certainly, and so I think Sanders is a very attractive alternative to a lot of people, and a very sort of the first guy that's come along that really, I think, speaks to the American left and speaks to a lot of the, what we've lost since the New Deal, since FDR, since even Lyndon Johnson. In the last 30 years, a lot of those programs have gone away, and things haven't gotten better for most people.
Well, and I think for that,
and so he's looking to dial that back a bit.
Well, yeah, and I think for that political thing, he actually is really the answer to what the right has been doing recently with like the Tea Party and everything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
he is the reverse of that, but he's doing it in such a way that is hitting, especially like millennials. Yeah. Oh man, do millennials love that guy? Yeah.
And I think there can be a long-term good whether he's a legitimate candidate or not. But I'm also curious then, because I have never counted myself a fan of Hillary Clinton. I guess I'm of the mind that I would rather see Hillary Clinton win than Bernie Sanders lose. And so I kind of wonder if how far along does Sanders? Do you see Sanders going? And if he falls by the wayside, how do you feel about someone like Clinton?
I'd be fine with her. I mean, again, fortunately, we have a two-party system, which is bullcrap. Frankly, I think that political debate should be like a 10 viable candidates is equally split. The Green Party, this party, that party, but that's a whole different can of worms.
Right.
But I'd be pretty good with her. I mean, she's, again, not like, I think Comcast is one of her biggest supporters and stuff like that, and I hate them. So, but you get that with most people.
Right.
One thing I think, though, that we're underselling ourselves on is actually, like I said again, the younger vote.
Uh-huh.
They grew up in the post-baby boomer bubble.
Right.
And people say it's the economic bubble. All said, no, it is the baby boomers.
Yeah.
and the greed from the 80s. And where most of us, I'm a millennial, I grew up in that time period, are just done. Like, we saw how this can work. And
Right.
back in the day, it was working. Like in the 1950s, I think it was, CEOs were living in the same neighborhoods as the businesses they owned. Like if you worked at company XY, the CEO of company XY probably lived in your same neighborhood. It was the biggest house of the block, but it was still there.
And he made 20 times what you did, not 500 times what you did.
Yeah, like I think it's like something ridiculous, like 900% up.
Yeah, it's absurd. It's absurd. Yeah.
And so the thing on that front is most of us are looking back at that and going, well, why don't we just go back to the way the baby boomers were having? Because they seem to have a pretty cush deal.
Right. Right. And well, and of course, a lot of those CEOs were baby boomers themselves. Those people that are making that, sure, they grew up in an environment where the top guy only earned 10 times what the mid guy made or whatever. But now they're the ones that are making these absurd, 1,000 times what the lowest paid guy makes or whatever. And it amazed me. And of course, what they go figure that they think what's going to solve everything is more corporate tax cuts.
Exactly. So it's a different thing. And that's why I think that actually that candidate, Sanders, has an actual chance is because of so many people, just especially, like I said, again, the millennials, just so done.
Yeah. And so I mean, we can already hear, let's assume, for the moment, hypothetically, that he gets the nomination. You can already hear what the Republican attack ads are going to be. It's going to be socialist, 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 socialist over and over again. We're going to be bombarded with that word. And that would have worked for them. I mean, certainly, I think up to even this last election,
it would have worked.
It would have worked. Yeah, it absolutely would have played well and would have been very effective. And that's one of the reasons why, I think if you look back at Bill Clinton ran up with something which until the existence of the Tea Party was a solidly Republican record. He was not this great leftist liberal, and yet he was probably the most liberal guy you could have elected at the time. And now we're actually having a serious discussion about somebody who has gone out of the way to be to the left of the Democrats, which I think is, it certainly says that we've evolved, but I wonder who's being more optimistic, the Republicans in thinking they can just keep saying socialism, socialism, socialism over and over again, or the rest of us who are maybe thinking that it's time, but we could be in for a rude surprise. And I guess that's why. Well,
the funny thing, actually, the thing that's tickling me is most of the generation after mine, like I'm cusp, generation X or Y or whatever you want to call it. A lot of the younger kids have been looking in, they hear this word socialism and they don't have these negative connotations. They're like, what the hell does that mean? So they do a little research and they go,
sounds pretty good.
That sounds pretty good. Why not?
Yeah. And and really, unfortunately, you have some really, and again, going back to the baby boomers, you have some really shitty examples, whether it's National Socialism under Hitler or the sort of socialist communist states that grew out of like Mao and Stalin, which is not, there's no communist or socialist benefit that came out of any of those regimes. These were not about trying to make people's lives better or anything else. This was a power grab with a label attached to it.
Well, it was a power grab with a label, but actually, I know this is going to sound terrible.
Okay.
But one thing all those people were good at is making the country more solid.
Well, they came. Well, no, and I think they came along in very unique points in time. Exactly. Hitler does not get elected any other time in German history.
No,
he came along during a time of the highest point of political instability. So yeah, you have a point with that, certainly.
Yeah, and sometimes like you do need someone who is like, well, let's see what's wrong with the country and just smash it. Again, I'm not like saying, oh yay Hitler, because definitely not.
Too much of the audience would be on his hit list. It just is a start, but.
Stupid idea.
Just saying. Yeah. No, but it has this. It has a lot of really bad, really memorable historical examples, and then of course it has 30, 40 years of the 1% of those very uber successful baby boomers right at the very top, sort of paying a lot of money to spread this message that it's this bad thing, and so many people have just heard that for so long. And have looked at the historic examples of what they were told will happen by the very people who have been trying to prevent it from happening. And it's not surprising that so many people feel that way. But yeah, it is interesting because you're right. The younger folks don't have that lifelong indoctrination into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, capitalism hasn't been working out too well for them lately either.
No, they got to see things like, the recession and all that fun stuff. So capitalism is seeming more scary to a lot of people
let's graduate from college with, $50,000 in debt, and I can get a minimum wage job. And by the way, no one's even going to raise the minimum wage.
Exactly.
So it's like, way to sell capitalism. I think if anything, the biggest enemy of capitalism has been the capitalists.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they got too greedy. So then, I guess then the other aspect from politically, so, same-sex marriage is now legal, yay, and everyone's a big celebration and all that. But as so many people have pointed out, that's not the end of it. That's not the radical gay agenda marches on. Yeah. And I'm wondering where you see where do you see it going from now? What is the next thing that we're all going to be shoving down the Christian rights throats, as they like to put it? Okay, go on. I'm sorry.
Unfortunately, we're still actually dealing with the gay marriage thing. You see these things coming up every day of county clerks being like, no, we're still not going to do it.
Right.
But that's short term. That's
going to resolve itself. That's not even going to require a court battle, because the court battle's already fought.
Exactly.
All that's going to require is somebody to say, just to make a point of it, and then it's over.
The feds coming into the office and being like, you're doing this, or we're arresting you for breaking the law.
Or you're out of a job.
Exactly. So that's a short term. I'm not a fortune teller, but I'd really hope that the next stage is focusing on the T.
Yes.
Of that whole thing.
Well, and unfortunately, I think the Christian right got ahead of the curve there, and they decided, once they realized, I think about a year ago, maybe not quite a year ago, that once they realized gay marriage was a lost cause, they sort of said, okay, well, we're gonna go ahead and concede that point, but damn it, we're not going to give the transgender people anything.
Yeah.
And so now they're driving the conversation and framing the issues around bathroom bills and varsity sports in high schools and all kinds of nonsense I don't want to say nonsense, but these are not the issues that, if you were to ask anyone in the trans community a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, this is not what needs to be addressed. This isn't employment, housing, medical care,
Well, no, but the thing about it, though, is with those pushing of your daughter's going to be put in the same bathroom as a crazy person, or sicko or whatever ads that they've been doing. Like, I've seen logistic ads about that. It's terrible.
Well, they've got to make it salacious. They've got to make it. They can't have an honest conversation with real people the way that, say, I don't know, I'm doing, here and other people are doing, of course. But they can't have a real conversation. They're not going to win. Well,
no, but that's the thing. But the nice thing about that, the thing that they're doing that they haven't realized they're doing, is they're bringing awareness. That's one thing the transgender community has been severely lacking.
Yes.
Like I was saying before, most transgender people, that is not focused on the thing. That's why,
but historically, but there's a reason for that. And historically, that would be a very dangerous proposition.
Oh, it still is dangerous.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, yeah, exactly.
1 in 12 trans women are murdered.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like 1 in 9 or something like that if you're trans
woman of color. Yep.
And so, therefore, there aren't a lot of people going like, yeah, let's, get out there and tell the world. Because as soon as you do, you are painting a target. Like, and those numbers, like I was saying, those 12 and 9, 1 in 12 and 9.
Yeah.
Are just walking down the street numbers. Those aren't even, flaunting it numbers.
Right.
If flaunting quotation mark, it's numbers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's like we're you've got one political party which wants America thinking about who's going to be in the bathroom with you. Meanwhile, I think of it something like transpanic defense being a legal, legitimate murder defense in 49 of 50 states.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, and we're talking about where people pee. I mean, no, but I know, but I mean, it's just that not only are the numbers there, which are horrifying. I mean, whether you're looking at it from a personal perspective or a societal perspective, I mean, that is just insane. But on top of that, you can actually simply get away with it. Forget about it being a hate crime. It's more like that's a defense. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, look, if you killed somebody because they're trans, that should be an aggravating circumstance, not a mitigating one.
Exactly.
I mean, how is this even a thing? And yet, I mean, it'd be one thing if we're talking about Alabama and Mississippi, et cetera. But we're, like you said, 48 out of 50 states.
Yeah. And
that's appalling.
It's ridiculous. But like I said, again, this message of scary bathrooms are pseudo backfiring.
Right. Well, yeah, I think they kind of forgot how to do it. I mean, Ronald Reagan one of the reasons he was so successful was that he really knew how to deliver that message of, I'm going to screw you over and gut the middle class, but you're going to love me for it. And Ted Cruz just doesn't have that gift. And no. Rand Paul just doesn't have that gift.
And so, yeah. But the nice thing is now, like, we have activists and spokespeople out in the world.
Yes.
And so that way now they can be a pseudo avatar for the community, right, and actually speak out against the bullshit that's been happening. And since the focus has been put on them by the opposition, like the Republican Party and everything like that, people who didn't even freaking know who what the word meant are like talking about it now.
Right. Well, and yeah, I mean, it's always one of those things. If you put a human face to something and it becomes real and it becomes something that you can relate to, it's kind of like the more that you talk to trans people, the more you're going to realize that this isn't this crazy, monstrous, weird, perverted thing that the right is trying to make it. Meanwhile, the more that you hear out of, say, Ted Cruz and company, the more you realize just like, oh, wow. I mean, like, the more I hear from them, the more I don't like them. And I think that's kind of becoming, like you said, it's sort of backfiring on them, because the more you're going to hear from each side, it's going to start moving. And the momentum is there. I mean, granted, the LGBT movement has been mostly an LGB movement in terms of any legislative and judicial victories, but
more LG than they've also.
That's
the community's
true. That's
also
true.
left the bi community behind a lot. It's weird. I've seen a lot of people who, are gay and lesbian, but as soon as you find out, they once slept with a man or slept with a woman, they're not really gay.
Yeah, that is. I have heard a lot of that as well, and it's an odd thing to me. Because,
it's no one's perfect. The communities are never perfect, but right. I think again the next thing that's going to be happening is actually trans rights, which should be happening. It is a long time coming, and
absolutely.
For instance, I think like 2 or 3 states now that have required insurance agencies to cover SRS, and they're realizing that this people being like, it's going to cost so much money, and they realize no, it's really not.
Well, all of that stuff, I love to say this of conservatives, they know the cost of everything and the value of nothing. And, it's always assumed that this stuff happens in a vacuum, but the reason that we say medically necessary is because it is essentially preventative. I mean, we can treat, for example, gender dysphoria, or we could spend a lot more money treating depression and anxiety and numerous other things much less effectively at a much higher cost.
Exactly.
And I hate to make it all dollars and cents, because it's not to so many people, but to the opponents, it's like, no, you're arguing this wrong. And they get this with all kinds of preventative care, though. Oh God, the doctors will be overwhelmed. It's like, well, I hope so. There are sick people out there who need to go to the doctor. I'd rather have them go to the doctor than, end up in the emergency room, dying when they could have just had a tooth pulled or had an ear infection taken care of.
Exactly. And again, the same with it plays off in the trans community there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there would be also, if people were more accepting of the whole idea of things, we see a lot of less suicides too, unfortunately.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, this is where I just, I'm not going to say, I don't like to say Republicans and Democrats, because I'm not a Democrat. Democrats certainly have just as many problems, not just as many, but their share of problems. But when I think of liberals and conservatives on these things, it's like, I don't think of conservatives as ever really wanting to solve the problem so much as to sell their agenda. Whereas the liberal side, or the more progressive side, maybe is a better way of putting it, is the agenda is helping people. The agenda is making people's lives better. And so, it's like the opponent of this will use the high suicide rate as saying, well, see, we told you they're mentally ill. Of course, disappearing the fact that their prejudice and their stigma and their verbal attacks and abuse and discrimination is, of course, what's causing all of the problems.
Yeah. Well, do we want to go deeper for a minute? I can go
absolutely.
Deeper for a second. I know for a lot of people, and this is in that community, in that situation, is that the unfortunate thing is their lives are hell right now.
Absolutely.
100% hell. And a lot of people who do commit suicide feel like nothingness, or just getting out of whatever situation they're in is a better situation. Speaking from, I'm not like diagnosed with manic depressive or anything like that, but I have had my really dark moments.
Sure.
And if it wasn't for some really good friends, I probably would not be sitting here talking to you right now.
Right.
And I can tell you the mindset that I was in is, this is painful.
Yeah.
Let's make it go away.
Right. Right. And that can be, and again, absent those friends, and then, and actually forget just absent those friends, but turn those friends into people who have been essentially indoctrinated to feel that this is something horrifying, something bad, something perverse, whatever. And then it just adds to that. I don't get it. I hear a lot of people, well, the very simplistic viewpoint of XXXY, the gender binary, etc. And it strikes me as very immature, very childlike, or very simple understanding of the human condition. But at the end of the day, it's like it almost doesn't matter. It's like the bigger point is here: you are hurting people. They are not hurting you. And this is the whole. There was a conservative poster that I banned from my blog a few months back, and he's still butthurt over it and hounds me on other forums now whenever he can. But he commented recently how this it was an anti-bullying bill actually that came across Congress, and the Republicans shot it down.
Yeah,
and
I saw that.
I'm like, how do you support bullying? I mean, I don't care how you feel about LGBT people. We're talking about beating up children. And it occurs to me, it's like, he's saying, well, this wouldn't have happened if you weren't trying to shove that gay agenda down our throats. I'm going, what are any of these people doing to you? And you're talking about your rights to literally physically assault them now? This is insane.
My favorite reply to that is, did you hear about the student who got the crap beaten out of him for being Christian? And they'll be like, what? And they'll be like, yeah, they totally beat up and told that if they came into school, they'd be stabbed and things like that. And they'll be up in arms about it. And they're like, oh, by the way, that was just them being gay.
Right, exactly.
Oh, did I say Christian? I meant gay.
Right, no, right. And suddenly it's okay. Suddenly, yeah, exactly. That's an interesting point. I'm stealing that. I'm going to absolutely try that sometime. God. Well, that's just it. The whole war on, the whole you're a bigot if you support same-sex marriage. And I'm like, or if you support traditional marriage. And I'm like, wait a minute. Nobody doesn't support traditional marriage. There aren't any gay people out there who are trying to ban traditional marriage. Traditional marriage will exist exactly as it always has. Oh, yeah. God.
But it's a slippery slope. As soon as those gays get their way, we're going to be marrying horses next.
Well, I will say this. I will give them credit on one thing, in that I do believe that the polyamorous folks and even the polygamous folks will come forward and say, okay, what about us? And I think it's a legitimate point to make, except that I'm inclined to say, well, who fucking cares? Mm-hmm. I mean, if we're talking about consenting adults, I don't really care. I do care when we're talking about people that aren't consenting and people that aren't adults. That I care about, but that's illegal regardless. It's not going to lead to marrying children because children can't enter into legal contracts, which is what marriage is. From the point of view of the government, it's not all this superstitious, spiritual. Well, I don't want to sound too insulting. I know a lot of people are going to take offense to me putting it that way.
We're already getting some pretty deep territory here.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not about the religious aspect of it. It's a simple legal contract. That's what your rights are. Your rights are not derived from the church or from a religion. They're derived from law. And it's a legal contract, but minors can't enter legal contracts. Or if they do, they're under very specific circumstances and there are very specific restrictions. That exists regardless of any other consideration. So, I mean, again, you're talking consenting adults. I don't really care. Oh, we're going to marry a dog. Really? Can I enter into any other form of legal contract with a dog? Oh, I can't?
As soon as I can buy a house from a dog, we'll talk.
Exactly. Well, I don't know. Going back to the reality TV thing, there's some dogs that live in better houses than I do.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know. And it's just the funny thing is, as the momentum builds and as we go down that slippery slope, rather than it becoming more and more frightening, it just, to me, the opposition just starts sounding more and more absurd as each day goes by and the sky doesn't fall.
Well, that's going to be the fun thing. 10 years from now, people are going to point to it and go, yeah, look at this.
Right. And you know what? They go back and you show people protesting civil rights. And I mean, even people who are actually racist don't want to be associated with civil rights opponents and segregationists from the 40s and 50s and early 60s. I mean, that's history has pretty much made its judgment on those folks. And I don't get how somebody can be sitting in this day and age and think it's going to be any different 10 or 20 years from now.
People are silly. Is what it comes down to.
Right. Yeah,
people are silly. I'm silly in a completely different way.
Yeah, I hear you.
My insanity just does not invade in other people's lives.
Well, see, and this is the other thing. This is the other thing is it's kind of like if it doesn't affect me, it's really none of my concern. And I was and this I'm not sure which order these interviews will air, so I apologize if what I'm about to mention has already aired or hasn't aired yet for anyone who's listening and confused. But I was interviewing a pro-choice cartoonist last night, and it was kind of one of these things where I started out sort of admitting that when it comes to abortion, if we're talking about a moral issue, I'm actually in the camp that says that unless you're saving a life, abortion is immoral. Yet, I am absolutely pro-choice because unlike, well, let's just say right-wing conservatives, I don't labor under the delusion that other people should lose their rights merely because I have an opinion about something, you know? And it goes back to regardless of how I feel about gay marriage, it doesn't affect me. If I'm gay, then it affects me in that it gives me an option in life, which is always a good thing. And if I'm not, then it doesn't affect me. And I don't understand how people can get that excited about things that don't affect. I mean, I understand abortion. That's always gonna be a sticky issue. But something like gay marriage, it's like this literally has nothing to do with you if you're an opponent of it. And trans rights as well. I mean, it does not affect you. It does not affect an opponent thereof.
Well, the fun thing is actually most people don't even realize that they know a trans person. I mean, I'm not kidding. I've met plenty of people who are like, "Oh man, I didn't realize that she or he used to be a dude or whatever. I really liked them." And it's like, likes?
You don't anymore, though. Oh wow,
you don't anymore. Okay,
because they're totally a different person because of who they were 20 years ago or whatever. Yeah. God. And that says so. I mean, what I don't understand is somebody will make that statement as if. They're saying it as if it's right. It's like, you don't realize this says so much more. This says nothing about the other person, but it says a lot about you. It says a lot about who you are as a character, that, you know, what your character is, that you hear something like that and you're like, oh, I've totally changed my mind about this person. What? Where have you been? Oh my God. Well, Tara, I appreciate it. It's been fun talking to you. I appreciate you coming on the program. Thanks a lot. And one more thing, let's the website one more time.
mockgirl.com. Or if you want to see something a little bit more fluffy, you can also go to my other webcomic, terrasdiary.com.
And that is also linked to that's linked to from Mock Girl as well, as I recall.
You can see all my other comics that I haven't completely ignored.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
I want to thank Tara for coming on the program. What started out as a conversation about a comic evolved into a very interesting political discussion, covered a lot of ground, and I really appreciate it. I really had a good time, and I would look forward to having her back on a future date if she's so inclined. As always, if you have any questions or comments about anything you've heard here tonight, or suggestions for future shows, guests, or topics, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at niceguy9418@usa.com, friend me on Facebook at Eddie Cabot, or leave a comment on my blog at eddiecabot.blogspot.com. Thank you very much for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your evening here on Rainbow Radio.